Won't be the last one you hear today. Please welcome Mathew Yong.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. My name's Mathew Yong. I'm a manager at the Department of Transport and Main Roads. We're leading the delivery and development of the Queensland Electric Queensland Electric strategy. The future is electric. So the Queensland government really is one of the leading governments, I guess, in Australia for trying to push the adoption of electric vehicles in Australia. We were the first state to have a comprehensive strategy. It has about 16 different actions in that. We were very fortunate at a time when we were developing this strategy, and we just didn't do it by ourselves. We did it in conjunction with the Department of Environment and Science, with Economic Development Queensland, part of State Development. We did it with Department of Energy. There was about 4 or 5 different agencies that were kind of contributing to it, because, and I suppose that really shows the change in transport and what electric vehicles is. It's not just a transport issue. You know, we're talking about energy. We're talking about a lot of different factors to try to actually deal with the barriers that are in place to kind of push that greater adoption of electric vehicles. Okay, so this is us. This is Fast Facts. I'm just going to try to... sorry, you'll have to bear with me. I need to look over to the side screen. I don't have one in front of me, which I normally have. So this is just a little bit about us. Sometimes this plays as the video, and there we go.
Yeah, mate. Took the time. Where'd you get this vest from? It's not yours, is it? Take it back.
All right, so that video really just to show the kind of breadth of the work that Transport and Main Roads do. We don't just build roads, we actually provide the funding for all the public transport services. We have the customer service centres throughout Queensland. We have maritime as part of our responsibility. So there's about 9,000 people in TMR. We're one of the larger government agencies. So how we came about this strategy is it fits into a number of government priorities. The main one is about reducing emissions. It's a huge priority for the Queensland government. They released the Queensland Climate Transition Strategy about midway through last year, and that has 3 key outcome areas that we're trying to achieve. For us in the transport space, it's about trying to achieve less than 30% emissions on our 2005 levels by 2030, and ultimately for the state, 0 emissions by 2050, which is a very ambitious and a really great target to aim for. It fits in with our Paris climate agreement targets. Transport as a sector is the second highest emitting sector in Queensland and in Australia. Our average is slightly below the Australian average, but it's still very high. And as other other areas of the economy decarbonise, such as the wholesale electricity generation market, ours will continue to increase. So there's two actions that we're leading in transport, as I said earlier, and what I'll talk mainly about today is the future is electric, the Queensland Electric Vehicle Strategy, and also the development of a net zero transport emissions roadmap, which is the other 50% of my job, which is looking at the whole of the transport sector. So what are we trying to do, and what do we need to kind of deal with? There's a number of barriers to greater adoption of electric vehicles in Australia. In terms of comparable OECD countries, we're really, really low. EV sales last year in Australia were about 0.1% of the total new vehicle sales. There were over 1 million vehicles sold in Australia, but only 0.1% of those were electric. That compares to countries which are clearly Norway, which is clearly the world leader with about 39% of their vehicles, and I believe maybe last month actually 50% of all new vehicle sales were actually electric. But comparable countries like the UK, which are right-hand drive vehicles, their sales are about 1.86%. So that doesn't seem like a lot, I guess, but if you think about Australia being 0.1% and the UK selling 1.86%, it's actually a huge margin of difference. So we've got a long way to catch up. We've got a lot of things that we need to deal with, and these are common factors that every country or jurisdiction that wants to adopt EVs or have a greater uptake of EVs as part of their vehicle fleet have had to overcome. So there's obviously the cost and model availability. There's the infrastructure availability to support EV motorists, and then there's the awareness, events like today and why you're here to find out a little bit more about EVs. But there's a lot of benefits for electric vehicles. As I said, a big push for us is obviously the environmental angle. It's about reducing emissions. Currently, if you charge an EV off Queensland's grid, it will emit, and I don't have any notes in front of me because I don't have a computer, so I'm just going to point you to the top channel. It's about 1.4 tonnes of carbon compared to 4.2 tonnes. And that's off Queensland's current grid, where we still have a lot of coal-fired generation. That is changing. You would have seen one of the other commitments from the transition strategy is 50% renewables by 2030. We're about 8% now, I believe, and it looks like we'll probably hit about 20% next year. And that seems like a big leap, but when you have all these big-scale projects coming online, it really pushes up the numbers quite quickly. So there is significant, those carbon numbers will continue to drop, whereas if you're driving obviously a petrol or a diesel vehicle, those numbers will stay the same. And there's also a great economic benefit for individuals. You'll save quite a lot of money in terms of your ongoing transport costs, how much you pay for fuel. We know charging off the grid, if you're just using a standard tariff and nothing quite special, it's about 50 cents equivalent a litre compared to the ongoing fluctuating cost of petrol and diesel. If that then gets magnified across the whole economy, that actually puts a lot of money back into people's pockets that can be spent in other areas of our economy. In addition, we generate all of our own electricity here in Queensland. We actually export it generally to other states, whereas we import all of our fuel, as does the rest of Australia. So it's got a lot of other benefits: fuel security, cleaner air in terms of the urban air pollution, which we never really think of here in Australia, but it is actually a big issue. And supporting renewables, all those type of good things. So there's a lot of benefits there, and that's the government recognises that, and why we're actually pushing a higher adoption. So this I guess is the key component, the core of and collates all of our action. It's called the Future is Electric, Queensland's Electric Vehicle Strategy. It was Australia's first holistic strategy. There's 16 actions tabled within it, and that's meant to address, as I was saying, those key barriers around infrastructure, around awareness, around the cost. And it's also looking, we recognise that things will move. You'll see here today there's a whole bunch of vehicles that we didn't know would get into the Australian market, but they're starting to. So we need to think again a bit differently, and so that's in there as well about what we might need to do into the future. About how to kind of continue that uptake. So I'll talk about broadly the barriers and the type of actions that we're doing to address them, and then happy to answer any questions afterwards. So as I said, awareness is a huge component. It's kind of funny, you guys probably know a little bit more, but certainly talking to different people and the stuff that you read, there's a lot of misconceptions about what electric vehicles are, what the batteries are capable of, will they suit people's individual needs, and obviously people need to do their own research and find out about that. But as part of the strategy, part of promoting like the super highway that we've built, we've been attending like the Noosa EV Expo. We've gone up to Cancer Eco Fiesta. Things all around the states to promote that we have the strategy, promote that we've built the infrastructure. We're going to be, and we are working with some tourism partners to develop up some specific electric vehicle driving tourist products that will help to utilise the infrastructure that we've built. And if we can get people to, hire EVs, that's an opportunity for them to experience it in another way that they can then understand a little bit better by actually feeling and doing what an EV is actually capable of. Where we developed a web portal, so we've got, if you could go to the Queensland Government /electric vehicles, we've got a whole bunch of information on there as well. And we also set up a industry, community and government panel called the Queensland Electric Vehicle Committee, which is chaired by my Minister Mark Bailey. The intent of that is to get everyone together to cooperatively determine how we can actually push and create that demand for greater electric vehicles. The next one, is the kind of the showpiece action of the strategy, the Queensland Electric Super Highway. This is a series of 17 locations from Coolangatta to Cairns and from Brisbane out west to Toowoomba. This was the first action that we completed because we recognised that one of the biggest barriers was infrastructure. When you look at consumer surveys, a lot of people are saying, well, I'd like an electric vehicle, but what happens if I want to go up the coast? Where do I go and charge? I don't feel supported, therefore a vehicle won't actually meet my needs. We know that, generally most people won't travel more than about 38 kilometres. That's the average. So if you're looking at curves, that's even quite generous in a day. But, we do like to go and travel up the coast or down the coast or, go for a driving holiday. So we need to make sure that people are supported. So this was the first initiative that we completed. It was done in partnership with, as you can see down the bottom, a lot of the local councils, as well as QR, Gold Coast Airport, James Cook Uni and UQ. What we've built there is one 50 kilowatt DC fast charger and one 22 kilowatt slower charger. They're currently free to use until the end of the year. That was to try to kind of promote the uptake. And the government actually provided us, as part of the last election committee, another $2.5 million to build additional sites. So they're located no more than 200 kilometres apart. In fact, there's only one between Tully and Townsville, which is about that distance. A lot of them are a lot closer, 80 k's, 130 k's. But we obviously want to provide additional opportunities for people to choose when they can stop and recharge their car and also recharge themselves. We're a transport department. Safety is obviously one of our main concerns, so stop, revive, survive. In addition to that, and looking at that tourism opportunity, this has actually given us a huge ability to encourage people into towns where they may not have stopped before. So for local governments, it's a great opportunity for people who may not have stopped in their town to stop, pull in while they're waiting to recharge their vehicle, which on a 50 kilowatt charger, depending on your battery, might be 30 minutes, might be 40 minutes. You can stop, have a cup of coffee, maybe have something to eat. 3 minutes to go. So the additional charges that we'll be building will be just infilling in between those ones. We might also push it a little bit further north, and we've been talking to New South Wales and how we connect the two highways up the Pacific and the New England. It's been used over 2,000 times, which is fantastic. There's only about 800 EVs registered now in Queensland, and that's been growing. When we first built this, there was about 700 and something, so it certainly is helping. And I've had stories of people that they've called us up and said, oh yeah, I've driven from Melbourne and I went all the way to Cairns because I could now, thanks very much. So it seems to be doing what it's meant to be doing. It's just meant to be catalytic infrastructure, and by that I mean, you know, the Queensland government doesn't want to be the BP of the future, I guess, but you know, we wanted to at least create the momentum first, and then eventually, you know, we will see private companies enter this market. There was a recent announcement, Charge Fox, who are going to build a infrastructure from Adelaide up to Brisbane using ultra-fast chargers. So that's great to hear. It's also helped with the manufacturers as well, knowing that there is government support and that people will come out. They've actually said to us, yes, because you've done this, we'll actually start bringing out vehicles now. We know the plug types to use. So it's managed to do a lot of things, which is good for a very small investment in infrastructure. The third one, and I'll speak quite quickly on this, is about bringing down costs. So there's a lot of ways that we can do this. If you buy and register an EV in Queensland, they actually attract the lowest stamp duty and the lowest registration. Another of the initiatives that the government can do is obviously use our purchasing power through our fleets. Queensland government has about 10,000 vehicles under management. So we've got, under the headline strategy, The Future is Electric, QFleet have developed their EV transition strategy. They're looking to double the number of electric vehicles in the Queensland, at least double the number of electric vehicles in the Queensland government fleet every year for the next 4 years. Now look, that's coming off of a very small base. When they were developing the strategy, we only knew of one more affordable EV coming into the market. We weren't about to go and buy Teslas, so as much as a public servant I'd like to do that, that's not how you want your taxpayer dollars spent. So as more vehicles come onto the market, and we've got Nissan here today, we've got Renault, there's two Hyundais, which are, you know, all sub $50,000 vehicles. Still expensive, but much more affordable. Hopefully this will promote additional markets to come on. We'll review those targets and adjust it as we go along. My minister was recently down in Sydney talking to all the other ministers. We're trying to get other state governments to commit to this as well, and then collectively through the nation's buying power, through the nation's government's buying power, we can encourage more vehicles in and hopefully lower prices. And then obviously eventually that will work its way into the second-hand market as well. So lastly, I just wanted to talk about, well, what's the future of EVs? I'm going to be very quick on this. It's changing rapidly. Since I've been in this space for about the last 18 months, there have been significant changes. We all know about battery prices decreasing. I just like this because you can see Thomas Edison up on the top right with the, you know, one of the first electric vehicles over 100 years ago. Brilliant. The EV1, which is, you kind of look at it now, it's not a very attractive car at all. But then you've got the Hyundai Ioniq. It's a much more normal kind of looking car. You know, it's becoming mainstream. You know, and this is what we really expect to see in the future. And then you've got the thing, the truck up the top, which is an all-electric autonomous logging truck that's currently on trial up in Sweden. So who knows what else the future will bring. Thank you.
And without further ado, I will welcome Michael Milford from QUT Autonomous Cars.
Thank you, Michael.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just calibrate my distance from the mic. Can everyone in the back row hear me all right? Fantastic. All right. Welcome. Thanks for coming along this morning, early on a Saturday morning. What I would want to do today is just give you a little bit of a snapshot overview, a little bit of a tour of what's happening and what's not happening in autonomous cars all around the world right now, today. Autonomous cars and electric vehicles are, I guess, inextricably linked together. Electric vehicles will be able to go ahead without autonomous vehicles succeeding, but autonomous vehicles succeeding will also critically rely on, I guess, the progress of electric vehicle technology. So it'll be an interesting space to watch. I'm going to talk about why, a little bit of the history, who's doing it, how they're doing it, and then give you some I'll give you one prediction for the future. I'm not going to give you any more predictions, although you can try it in question time. I guess, where is this information coming from? Well, you would see a lot of this stuff on the news. We're also fortunate to get to visit most of these self-driving car companies and get rides in a lot of their cars. Obviously, we can't disclose anything confidential, but we get to see much of the amazing stuff that's happening here in Australia, but also overseas in places like the States. So self-driving cars, why? Well, there's a whole heap of reasons spruiked, but there's really two reasons. One is money. It's predicted that self-driving cars will be a $7 trillion market over the next 10 or 20 years. Whether that actually happens, who knows, but there's huge financial potential. The other reason, of course, is safety. So we know that, tragically, lots of people die on our roads around the world every year. It's about 1.3 million people die every year. In Australia, it's over 1,000. In the States, it's 30 or 40,000. One of the things to remember about electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, though, is if they are deployed, it's likely, although not certain, that they'll be deployed in sort of well-developed cities where the road toll per capita is already quite low. So you might not see a massive dent in this road toll, even if the technology advances, at least not for a little while until they're more widespread. Some history, autonomous vehicles and indeed electric vehicles, they're nothing new, right? Autonomous vehicles have been going for decades and decades. This one is slow. It's from Carnegie Mellon University. It's slow because it doesn't have a lot of computer power and there's a lot of very heavy computers. That's why the vehicle is so big and heavy. By the 90s, they could drive pretty well on the highways. They've been able to drive autonomous cars pretty well on highways for more than 20 years. And pretty well is the operative word there. It's really or relatively easy to make an autonomous vehicle or an autonomous truck that does the right thing most of the time. It's really, really, really hard to make it work all of the time. And that's what all of these companies are throwing billions of dollars at the moment to try and solve. The modern birth of cars happened in the US probably about 10 or 15 years ago. There was a lot of challenges run by the Defense Agency in the US. In 2004, none of the cars were able to drive more than about 10 or 11 kilometers. In 2005, 1 year later, 5 or 6 of the cars managed to cross the full 200-kilometer course autonomously. So this is like all technology today, that progress in many areas, although not all areas, is incredibly fast, incredibly rapid, although frustratingly not in all areas. People have done competitions. The initial competitions with cars driving around, there was a few prangs, the cars hit each other occasionally, but they were pretty impressive. And this is what people have been working on. So the current state of play, people talk about levels of autonomy. Level 0 is what we have now when we're driving. Level 5 is an autonomous car, probably has no steering wheel, and even if you want to take over the car, you have no way of doing it. Most of the car companies are trying to go for level 4 autonomy, where the car won't rely on you. The benefit of level 4 autonomy is that it opens up driving opportunities and transport for people who couldn't otherwise drive. So if you have a vision impairment, or you're disqualified from driving for other reasons, or you want to have a nap, level 4 is what you want in terms of helping you get around. There's lots of different players in this field. This is one of the hottest technological races. The electric vehicle market is pretty big, but autonomous cars is where I guess where all the hype money is, where the many tens of billions of dollars is currently playing out. There's lots of different players. There's lots of large startups. This is Nutonomy, which started in Singapore and now operates in the States and in Singapore. And what they want to do is create a ride-sharing fleet that operates in the center of a city. You don't own the car, you just book the car when you need it, and it takes you from point A to point B. This is one of the common models for how these companies will operate. There's companies like Cruise Automation, which works with GM, and they have hundreds of cars running around San Francisco. If you go to San Francisco, you'll be able to see their very distinctive autonomous cars running around the city. San Fran's a particularly difficult city to drive around if you've ever been there, so they've taken on quite a big challenge. And they work with GM, so they're working with a major player in the field. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of these little startups that start up all around the place. Like you'll see new startups announced literally every week from countries around the world. And these startups all have their varying approaches to solving autonomous vehicles. Some are doing it using very conventional engineering and sort of traditional artificial intelligence. Some of them are using some of the newfangled state-of-the-art techniques in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and everything in between. You'll have the whole spectrum. And typically these companies exist for a couple of years and then they're acquired by a much larger company which absorbs their talent into their workforce. All the traditional automakers are getting into autonomous cars or have already committed in a large way. Toyota put $1 billion initially into it, put another $2.8 billion into it about a year ago, and they have multiple programs in autonomous cars, both in Japan and in the States. So to stay relevant, almost all of the major automakers, not all of them, some of the high-end sports cars companies have resisted so far, have presences or have activity trying to make their own systems autonomous. And in a lot of cases, some of these companies are doing it not so much because they intend to develop the best self-driving car, but it's really a credibility thing. It's like a modern business having access to the cloud, for example. They're doing it just as much to sort of stay relevant. Google, tech companies play in this space, so Uber, Google, lots of NVIDIA, lots of tech companies are developing autonomous cars. They have the disadvantage of not having spent 30 or 40 years building physical cars. So they typically partner with people who have had 30 or 40 years experience building cars, because apparently it's not easy to just start up a car manufacturing line overnight. And then you have pivot plays. So this field is now, I guess, what you call a mature field. So it's been around for a little bit. So some people are trying to carve off little pieces of the problem to attack. This is Neuro.ai, where one of our students is actually working now. And they're doing last mile delivery. So that little thing you see running around, which is their first generation, it will deliver your supermarket groceries to your curb. So think of it as your grocery delivery service. The advantage of some of these alternatives to, and obviously all of these vehicles, or almost all of them, are electric. The advantage of some of these alternative models is that they're easier to solve in some respects. So this thing doesn't have any passengers on board. So if you're ever in a life and death situation where you've got to make a decision, you always choose to write off the vehicle because you don't have to worry about hurting the groceries. No one really cares in that situation. So it's a much simpler problem in some respects than the cars that actually carry passengers around, because then you've got to work out what to do about the people inside the car and outside of the car. There's no dilemma with these sort of systems. And people are realizing that this problem is hard. I think people realized from the beginning that it was hard, but it's becoming more apparent what the really hard problems are. And one of the hardest problems is interacting with people. People are understandably very unpredictable. We look at our phones, we cross the road, we step out into the road and then step back onto the road, we run across the road, we jaywalk, we break the rules in all sorts of creative ways, and it's very hard for a machine to understand and reliably work out what to do. So there's companies like this one, Perceptive Automata, and they're trying to make artificial intelligence that can predict what humans are going to do. You can make an autonomous car that's perfectly safe, but if you put it in the middle of the Brisbane metro area, it won't move. It will be petrified of every single person around it, and it will never move. So this is key to making an actual viable self-driving car. And there's, of course, a lot of assessment projects. So Transport and Main Roads is spooling up a whole heap of projects. I'm doing a project with TMR and iMove CRC on how autonomous vehicles will interact with our existing infrastructure. We'll look at whether we need new infrastructure to make these technologies feasible. But there's a whole heap of projects around this space, all around Australia. These cars use all sorts of sensors. The sensors and computers on board these cars are very power hungry, and they rely on having efficient battery technology. So this is once again where EV technology, especially in terms of energy density, is really critical. They use, you can see this is one of the Toyota research cars from about a year ago. They have a lot of sensors on board, and each one of those sensors has a power requirement. They use, this is one of the older Uber cars. They use GPS, of course. They use radar as well. Radar is what helps you stop hit things at the last minute. It's like a last-ditch protection system. And they use LiDAR. So if you've ever seen a picture of a self-driving car, it has this spinning dome on the top of the roof of the car. That's like the crown jewel of sensors in autonomous cars, and it tells you how far away everything is around the car. So this is actually inside one of the older Google cars when I was allowed to take photos, and you can see it predicting or mapping out where all the things are around the car. These sensors all have fairly high power requirements. cameras as well, and of course compute. So you have to run all of these newfangled artificial intelligence algorithms. You have to run a whole heap of different software stacks on these cars. And these programs, they use up a significant amount of the power budget, and this is particularly relevant. So range of electric vehicles is rapidly becoming one of the commercial battlegrounds over which manufacturers are fighting it out. And if you can make the intelligence on your system use less power, you might be able to drive the car an extra 5 or 10% between charges. And that, for many people, could be a significant reason to buy one car over another. So it's all inextricably linked together. There's been accidents, so there have been several high-profile fatalities. The Tesla crash was one of the first in 2016. The car was in autopilot mode. The driver allegedly wasn't paying attention. A truck pulled out in front of the car several hundred meters down the highway. And from some of the analysis, it may be that the vision systems on the Tesla struggled to see a truck which looked fairly white against a sky which might have looked fairly white. So this is just one of a million different challenges that are very hard to solve. And you can solve this 99% of the time, but that's not acceptable for autonomous cars. You need to solve it 100% of the time. And that makes it really, really hard. And that's why we don't have autonomous cars all around us right now. The other thing to emphasize, though, is that these cars are already deployed and are saving lives as well. So the bottom right was the Uber fatality from earlier this year, and that was just as much allegedly a result of bad management of the project or bad decisions as it was from faults in the underlying technology. And at the top left is a collage, and if you go to YouTube, you can see videos of thousands of examples of where Teslas have prevented accidents. So the technology is already preventing injuries and probably preventing deaths as well. So it's important, I think, to present a measured view of this, the state of affairs. And as I said, human interaction is really tough. So this is some joggers, a Tesla's going past it. That car does not know for certain that those joggers are not going to suddenly jump out in front of the car. So it slows down to be cautious. A lot of humans would not slow down that much, or they'd maybe veer out a little bit, actually deliberately breaking the law by going over the center line a little bit to steer around. Teaching a machine when it's appropriate to break the rules of the road is another very, very, very challenging task, even though we do it very regularly as humans. In terms of predictions, the only thing that I would say is technically possible now is low-speed, centrally controlled ride-sharing fleets in the center of a city like Sydney or San Francisco. There's a lot of reasons for this. First of all, the car is still useful, even if it only takes you around at 20, 25 kilometers per hour. That's still a useful speed to get you from one meeting to another in the center of a city. The car will operate 23 hours a day, so it'll earn a lot of money, which means you can spend a lot of money on putting the best tech on the car. And you already have a base of users who already use Uber and taxis regularly on a daily basis. So it wouldn't be too much of a transition for them. Beyond that, no one really knows what's going to happen. There's lots of disruption, and this will also relate to EV disruption. So if we have autonomous cars and they're electric, do all the petrol stations disappear? Does a lot of the automotive industry transform in terms of maintenance, in terms of fueling and fixing these systems? There's all sorts of changes. If you've bought a house or you're looking at buying a house, cars that drive themselves may transform the whole nature and reality of real estate. Maybe houses on the outskirts of city will have their prices go up, and maybe houses in the inner city will go down, or vice versa. This is not financial advice, but it's something to keep an eye on in terms of transformative effects on society. The layout of the city will change slowly, and in the ideal scenario, the number of cars will drop to a small fraction of the original, because no one or very few people will own cars. In the dystopian version of this, middle-class families now have 3 or 4 autonomous cars, and when you go to a football game and you want to get home from that football game, you send all 4 of your private autonomous cars to pick you, and they rotate the block at 2-minute intervals so that you never have to wait more than 2 minutes to get picked up. And obviously that would cause havoc for the traffic system. Hopefully that won't be the reality, but this is something the government and the public has to be aware of. And there's all sorts of other implications. In terms of how to navigate this space, well, there is a lot changing, and it's going to continue to change. So what I tell you today will probably, it could already be wrong today, but will definitely be wrong in a year or two, because things will change quite rapidly in this space. There's a lot of hype. You'll see the media, you'll see academics like myself, you'll see companies obviously hyping this up. Just because a lot of it is hype doesn't mean that the core background behind it won't really transform society forever, hopefully in a positive way. And as we said, it is changing rapidly. So if you are making decisions around any of these things, buying a house, investing in an electric vehicle company, it's worth checking in regularly because things can change overnight. We're always happy to talk. Thank you for coming out today to listen. And I have a couple of books to give away as well during question time if you've got young kids.